Hi everybody, it's David Fleming here from the Toronto Realty blog, and thanks for coming back for part 2 of my conversation with John Pasalis. I hope everyone enjoyed Monday's video. Let's pick up exactly where we left off on Monday and start it up again. Here's the classic. You knew this one was coming. Any insights or advice for first-time buyers planning on entering the market over the next 12 months? Specifically, any thoughts on down payment amounts, 5% versus 20%, and appraisal risks before closing would be appreciated. Love the blog, David, and thanks to both of you for your input. So first-time buyers, I guess we've kind of covered this, but interesting thoughts on down payment, 5%, 20%, and then appraisal risk is another topic that's been hot lately.
Yeah, I mean, the down payment amounts, I mean, personal, I don't think that really makes a difference. I mean, obviously, it's a personal decision how much people put down. So I don't have too much input on that because, again, that's like a personal finance question.
Yeah.
Appraisal risk, I think, is minimal, personally. Again, like the appraisal risks only become a problem when markets decline quickly. Like they did in 2017, obviously, but that wasn't normal. Like usually house prices don't plummet 20% in 4 months. Like that was just so odd. So I do think that it's, I think if you're a buyer, I think thinking about and worrying about these risks is good. I mean, one way to mitigate it is just to get a quick closing, obviously. Yeah. I mean, if you get like a 5-month closing, you're exposing yourself to appraisal risk. If you got a 45-day closing, the odds of the market turning in 45 days are probably pretty slim.
Yeah.
So probably, one way to mitigate that is just to kind of get a tighter closing date is what I'd say.
Yeah, and it's interesting because his question is over the next 12 months. I mean, tell me this is naive or if this sounds like a salesperson answer, but like Adam, the time to buy in the next 12 months is when you're ready. It's that simple. Like I've got this saying, it's better to overpay for a house you love than to underpay for a house you like. Every property I've ever owned, I've absolutely loved, and I've looked back and said, I would have paid more in a heartbeat. And so Adam's asking about the next 12 months. I mean, you buy a house in June and then, and they say in September, what's my property worth? Why are you selling it? No, I'm not. I just want to know. And so like, who cares is kind of the answer sometimes.
I honestly, it's so funny because I tell people, I don't worry about this stuff, and they probably think I'm full of crap and I'm in the business and I get that. The last time I made an offer on a house, believe it or not, I think was March 2017. Okay.
Yeah.
And anyone who knows me knows that I knew the market was nuts.
Yeah.
Okay. Like we all knew the market was insane, but I've been, I'm one of the most, buying for yourself. I think I read a long time ago that you wrote this blog post, which I thought was hilarious, where you're like, you are your own most difficult clients.
Yes.
And and I'm kind of the same. It's like I'm interested in 6 streets, and if I narrowed it down, it's only like 30 houses or something stupid like that.
Yeah.
So it just happened. This this detached house on a 30-something foot lot in Leslieville, which is insanely rare, just happens to come up. So, my options are like do nothing or just like try to get it. And I'm like, again, similar to what you're saying, I couldn't, even though, number one, I was more confident that Leslieville was going to be more resilient than York Region, for example, and just was less concerned. But even if my assessment was wrong and prices fell 20% the year after I bought it, I couldn't care less because I'm going to own it for 20 years. Like it generally makes no difference to me. Like at some point, in your 10 to 15 year horizon, you own a home, it's going to drop 20%.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter to me if it's now because a year from now, that home wouldn't have been for sale, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I agree with you. I don't sweat these things. I mean, it's, you obviously want to be careful and look for red flags, but trying to time it perfectly, no. I mean, if you're buying long term, that's kind of the best insurance, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see. We got Appraiser has chimed in. He's just more or less got an answer to Adam. Appraiser's one of my favorites. He's like Mr. Bull. Ben Rabideau last week said he didn't care for Appraiser. I forgot to ask Appraiser. He said he was banned from Garth Turner's blog. I got to remember to ask him why. So Professional Shanker, which is a great moniker, he says... I don't know what that means. I picture a guy in jail in the shower with a shiv, but he's dressed in a full suit. That's what I think of Professional Shanker. He says, what segments of the market will out and underperform on a relative basis for 2020 while we work and live in a pandemic? Condos, will we see owners, Airbnb, typical rental market, attempt to list, driving up supply? What about demand in highly populated areas? What will happen to demand from the spec investors? And then GTA suburbs, will an experience an increase demand speculation as people give thought to more flexible future working arrangements move forward? So first question, what's going to under and overperform? Second question is about Airbnb and condos. Third question is about people working from home. How's that going to affect prices in the suburbs?
I mean, I think the first two are related in the sense that I do think one of the more vulnerable segments for sure, we kind of talked about this, the condo market. I mean, downward pressure on rents is not a good thing if you're a real estate investor. And potentially softening prices in the future also is not great, and is not great for the long-term horizon of the condo market. I mean, heaven forbid, if condo prices drop 10%, what do those pre-construction investments look like, right? And I think those are the big red flags. So, and I don't know what's going to happen to condo prices. I kind of talked about, I agree. I think they were a little bit elevated. I think there was a bit of a demand shock that really pushed them up when they introduced the stress test on first-time buyers. That kind of literally, I think 4 months, price went up like $100,000 or something stupid like that. Again, I'm certainly concerned about that segment of the market kind of over the next little while, especially with what's going on with Airbnb, which is not going to change anytime soon. Like, there's nobody traveling the next while. So those units are either going to get listed for sale or get listed for long-term lease. And similarly, the other segment I think I talked about is probably more like 6 to 12 months out, is potentially the higher end, like the people who are very, very leveraged. I think like the entry-level home price range has been the most resilient and probably will be. But again, like, you can't have one segment fall without it slightly impacting another. So they're all a little bit connected.
Sorry, just letting my dog in. She's going nuts here. And I would agree on that. The irony is the run-up in prices in single-family entry level has been absurd. But if I had to pick one spot where it would continue to outperform the market, it would probably still be that. So I mean, we think it's nuts that people are paying $1.1 million for these $899 houses. I mean, maybe we'll see a bit of a dip, but I think that's going to outperform certainly one-bedroom condos. And then the luxury market is, I told my readers I bought a big honking house and I'm going to be here for 40 years. And to go back to the point we keep hitting on, I don't care if my house price is worth less than I paid in 2018. If it's going to go down a little bit more, if I don't need to sell, I don't really care. 10 years from now, it'll be worth more. But I agree with you that unfortunately I'm kind of stuck in this, I wouldn't call it luxury, but I'm in a price range that I think will probably underperform the market. So we've got, so here's your other buddy, Derek. Derek, LG, truly a monitor of endearment. How about a general history lesson? Here we go. Legends say, Old Testament, I believe, I think that's a joke. There was once a serial annual decline in Toronto house prices, 1989, 1990 onward. What happened, and what sustained the downward movement for so many years? Are we now happily immune from such multi-year declines for reasons suggested by Cal, or maybe other factors? More specifically, for the foreseeable future, should anyone think about a move-up or even consider buying a new home before selling the existing detached home? Answer can be addressed to Derek's wife. So he's asking, there's a reason he's asking, I guess. So maybe a bit of a history lesson here, John, and then he's talking about the move up, buying before selling. That's an interesting one.
That's a great one. So the history, I mean, it's really funny when we talk about the history. I mean, I know I talked to a lot of people what happened in Toronto in 88, 89, 90, and everyone's like, well, why did the crash happen? And I think most the most common answer you hear is interest rates. Like, they crashed because Bank of Canada raised rents steeply, and that's what killed the market, which is a bit of it's ridiculous conclusion. I mean, it's not that simple. I mean, the reality is there were a lot of things going on in the housing market before that. Immigration was actually a lot higher in the GTA in the 80s than it is even today. So a lot of people were moving here. There weren't enough houses. A lot of condos were being built back then on spec. So they weren't pre-sold with big deposits. I mean, they may have had people pre-buy them, but with very, very minimal deposits. So you had a lot of this speculative building in the condo segment. You know, inflation was a bit different, obviously it was higher, and you had a lot of people just speculating in the housing market in the late 80s especially. That's kind of when it really took off. So, you know, a lot of people were just flipping properties after 6 months because they were rising 30% a year. And it was just this, you know, it's kind of the culmination of all of these things. And, you know, this rapid acceleration in prices. I mean, the Bank of Canada raised rates because they wanted to cool the stupidity that was going on in the market, right?
Right.
And it doesn't crash because rates were up. I mean, it crashed because people inflated house prices higher than they should have been anyways, right?
Yeah.
And that's really kind of what happened. And I mean, one of the reasons it was, I mean, sustained, of course, is because, I mean, and shortly after they did that in the market tank, they dropped rates because Canada got into this prolonged recession. I mean, we had the sort of the side effects of NAFTA. The reality is a lot of jobs were lost in manufacturing in Ontario in the early 90s, whether it was directly NAFTA or not, or indirectly, a lot of manufacturing jobs got lost. So we had the combination of like, we're on the tail end of this housing bubble. You know, we have this recession. Also, we have this big trade deal that's kind of impacting jobs. And it was a prolonged decline. So I think it is different than today. I mean, everything is different. I mean, it's hard to say will we be there. I mean, I think the one difference today is that, I mean, rates are low.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, we have other problems. Like the risk isn't today that the bank's going to jack up rates to 5%. We have, like, our problems are that we're so over leveraged that they kind of can't increase interest rates.
Right.
And if they increase them even a bit, it's just going to like kill everybody's ability to finance their debt, right? So how do you get out of this? And I think there's a lot of good academic research that people are doing now to kind of try to understand, well, how do you move out of this type of environment? It's not just as simple as the federal government spends money on construction and that's what, you know, fiscal stimulus, that's what gets us out of a recession. Or you lower rates. You can't lower rates that much more. I mean, there's as low as you can go, like unless you go negative. You know, where do we go? So I think there are other problems and other challenges. It's not going to be like the late 80s and 90s. I don't know what it's going to look like because we're kind of in this, obviously, this different environment, right?
Yeah.
So it's really tough to kind of understand where things are going to go in the next, you know, few years.
Well, Ben was saying he thinks there's going to be negative interest rates, which would be, I don't know if he was, I think he was serious. I think a lot of people are being sarcastic about that. But I think it's a very real possibility just because everything's on the table right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think I was just seeing Warren Buffett was on a stream yesterday and he was talking about negative interest rates. I mean, because they had their big meeting for Berkshire. And yeah, I mean, I think it would be, I think most people can't even wrap their heads around what negative interest rates are.
Yeah.
But you know, again, I think if that happens, it's kind of funny if that's happened because it just digs us deeper, obviously, into debt and kind of prolongs this problem.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, one of the problems over the past, you know, I don't know, 2 decades-ish is that, you know, policymakers don't really want a recession, right? They're almost like operating like corporations where, you know, no quarter of negative growth is good. So we'll just dump money at all our problems, whether it's the government borrowing or whether we loosen credit for home buyers or whoever to stimulate the economy. And it's like we're just living off of borrowed cash. And that's what's been driving us, right?
Yeah.
And you, I mean, it's going to run its course. And I think that's kind of the challenge is like no one wants, I mean, the problem obviously is that deleveraging is ugly. Like it's not good. You know, when people go broke, they can't pay their debts. I mean, the U.S., they went through that after their Great Recession in the 80s. I mean, they significantly deleveraged. You know, their debt to income significantly lower than it was and much lower than ours. But, you know, is Canada going to go through that? And if we do, it's going to be like an ugly shakeup. And, you know, again, the governments can't control that. I mean, to sort of that first question, what can they do to kind of you can't control that, man. If people can't pay their debts, they can't pay their debts. The bank's not going to forgive them.
Yeah.
Like, right. And if that happens, I mean, it won't be great, but, you know, it's tough to predict kind of where things are going to be going over the next, you know, 12 to 24 months.
So before we move on, you got to tell Derek, to tell his wife that yes, he can buy that move up house.
Well, his question was, should I buy first? I think he said, right?
No,
was his question?
Let me double check.
His question.
He said, should anyone think about buying a new home before selling the existing one? You were right.
Zero chance.
Yeah.
I tell this to everybody. And, the funny thing, I tell this to every client I meet personally. Like, I try to caution them against doing that. I talk to them about the pros and cons. No one cares.
Yeah.
Like, that's just my assessment over all these years I'm doing it. Everyone's conclusion is, well, it's going to be a pain if we sell first. We might have to rent. We got to move twice. The kids. It's really difficult. All of this narrative, but they never contemplate the worst case scenario is if they buy first, right?
Yeah.
And even we've had sharp declines in our housing market 3 times over the past 12 years. We had it in 2008. We had it in 2017. We have it now, right?
Yeah.
And to me, and it can happen any time, like any big economic event or shock can screw up your housing market and make it very hard for you to sell your house. So I'm like so risk averse. Like I have zero interest in exposing myself to stupidity and risks that are out of my control. I personally would never do it. I would always sell first. And if I can't find a house, I just rent for a year or rent an Airbnb and because my worst case scenario is I got to move twice, and it's not great, but it's better than the stress of not being able to sell. And the people who did that in 2017, I mean, we both know lots of them got screwed because they either couldn't sell their homes in 2017, or they couldn't sell them for a price they needed to close on the home that they bought. Yeah. Right. So there's tons of stories. I mean, read there's so many stories, like Tess Kalinowski had tons in the Star about people who got not only sued, lost their deposits, but got sued for the decline in value of the home that they bought. They lost their life savings. Bad timing, bad luck. So I don't know, man. I'd never expose myself to that.
Well, I have never in my entire career had somebody sell before buying until I want to say one guy. I sold his place at 660. No, I sold his place on Wellesley, and then he ended up buying at 660 Pape. This is probably 7 or 8 years ago. But I had nobody stuck in 2017, and I'm not lying. I didn't have a single person that bought and then couldn't sell. But I've never had. I have one more set of people. They're probably watching this. They made out like bandits. They sold their property in the second week of March for a price that is absolutely they wouldn't dream of getting that now. So they're laughing, right? But I literally, in 16 years, I think I can count on one hand the number of people that I've had sell and then buy. And so I hear what you're saying. It comes down to your risk tolerance. And when the market's going up, there's no risk, right? And the risk for those people is, well, if I sell and then I don't find a property and I have to rent, I miss out on a year's appreciation and I'm not in the market. And to your point, 3 times we've had a shock to the system where people have been stuck. But knock on wood, I've never had it. So maybe I need to thank the real estate gods there.
Listen, the reality is it is minimal risk most of the time, and as long as you're willing to kind of tolerate that. I'm personally not. So I think it all deals with everyone's risk tolerance. But you're right. It's personal preference.
So Derek's gonna have a tough conversation with his wife tonight. Okay, so here's an interesting question. This is very what's the word? Not metaphorical. Existential, I guess. Assuming nobody has the ability to time the market, what is the purpose of using stats, and how much can they actually tell us about future prices? That's deep, man. That's deep.
That's a great question, actually. So, no, that's a fantastic question. Okay, here's the best way to answer that, I think. The statistics can't tell us about the future of the market, which is a fair statement. I don't think we're analyzing them to know where prices will be 6 to 12 months out, right?
Yeah.
But most people can't tell you where the market is today, right? And I think that's how we use it. So the best example I can give was in 2017, right? where, we had clients in the same boat. They bought and then they were going to sell. And we warned them, we saw the market turning, like, yeah, you can buy now, it's less competitive, but the market's slowing down. And by the time they listed in early May, I believe it was,
oh wow,
they got that first offer that was 5% less than what they wanted or were expecting, right? And the difference with us and a lot of these agents in York region who were like listening to their sellers and letting their sellers call the shots.
Oh no.
I was like, buddy, take the offer. Like because the market's not moving in your direction. Like every week you wait, it's going to get worse, right? And this to me is like a very important insight that because I had a lot of people like homeowners calling me from York region after couldn't sell their homes. And they're like, oh, we got an offer in May, but it was a little bit less than what we wanted, so we waited. I'm like, had you looked at the numbers, you would have known like the momentum of the market was going down, which means that waiting was actually not going to help you, right? Like most people's assumption is, well, if you don't get the price you want, you just wait, which is fine in a either flat market or rising market. That approach doesn't work in a declining market, right? So even, and similarly, when we had clients who were looking at buying in York region up there, we knew that the market was going to tank up there. So like their prices assumed a price decline. You know what I mean? Like they were going in with below like 10, 15, 20% below the most recent sales because we expected prices to fall. So it's not so much that it allows you to predict, but it allows you to make more educated guesses now. And I remember when I was writing about this stuff back then, I was like, there's lowball offers happening all over the place, especially like in York, because you had these distressed sellers and the market was tanking there. I remember other real estate agents at the time, like, lowball's offer is not a thing. Don't embarrass us, and don't embarrass yourself. You're not going to steal people's houses, And these are just people who didn't understand the data, because that's what the market was, man. Like you're not, the market was tanking. So his questions are really, whoever asked the questions are a really good one. And they're right. I mean, statistics are not going to tell you where the market's going to be 6 to 12 months out, but even knowing where they're at now and where they're trending over the next 3 to 6 months, which is the most they can tell you, I think is super helpful when you're making a decision about whether you should accept that offer if you're selling or how aggressive to be when you're buying. And I think that's the best thing I can say.
Great question. I saw it there, and at first I kind of flew by it. It's short, but that's a really good question. Libertarian, another one of my favorites, says not a specific question, more of a topic of conversation. So David, feel free to chime in on this one. One of John's more controversial themes is when he posts about the role of the investor in the market. When did he start looking at that? How much of an impact does he think the investor has? What ratio of professional investors to mom and pop investors? Is it condos and houses equally? Where does he see it going from here? So he says that he believes there's a large segment of the population that owns more real estate than principal residence. Others disagree, or at least, but he thinks that the market, that it does not impact the market. Or sorry, he's saying they think it does not impact the market. Love to hear both of our opinions as well. So what do you think from the investor standpoint there?
So that's a great question. I mean, I had started looking into that, I would say, in late 2015, early 2016 more seriously. And again, it was really driven by, the one thing I love about our business is you get to see things on the ground and you get to hear the stories, which to me is like the most fascinating thing, right? So, and around that time, we were getting so many people that were coming in and like, I want to buy an investment property. I'm like, okay, what do you want? Like a duplex, a triplex, whatever. Like, no, I just want a detached house in York region. I'm like, and when you go through the numbers, it's like you're going to spend like 1.1, you're going to make $2,200. Like, it's like you're losing money every month. And everyone's answer was always the same. It's like, I don't care. Like, who cares if I lose $1,000 a month? It's going up 10% a year, blah, blah, blah. I'm making $100,000 a year. The $1 million home is going up 10% a year. I've made $100,000. So who cares if I'm spending $1,000 out of my own pocket? And this was like uniform, like the consensus mood, right? And it was funny because at the time, like up until like about a year before that, I just had started doing a lot more reading into academic research into housing markets and housing bubbles and Kindleberger and Robert Schiller and like all of these economists who had just studied credit cycles and housing bubbles and the psychology of markets and Daniel Kahneman, I was reading a lot at that time. And you just start to realize that this doesn't make any sense, right? And that's really when I started to do more research and when I tried to quantify if this was really happening in the market. So really what I did was I said, okay, let me look into this because I'm like curious, like this can't be happening. So, you know, I ended up basically kind of coming up with this way of figuring out if people were buying homes and just strictly for investment and renting them on the MLS. And it turned out that's what people were doing and in significant numbers. And I think by like 2016, it was like 20+% of homes bought in something like Richmond Hill were like bought and then listed for rent immediately after. And people were paying on average something like 1.3 million. And I think the average went to something like 2,400 bucks.
Oh my God.
And you don't need to be a scholar to know that that doesn't work, like financially.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't work, man. Like it's stupid. It's crazy. So that's when I started to get like, holy shit, what's going on in the market?
Yeah.
And originally, you know, we kept a lot of that research internally for our clients, but I was like, this is just too nuts. Like I need to write something and just publish it. Like, and whoever wants to read it, they can read it. If they don't, they want to put it, you know, leave it and ignore it, all the power to them. But I've said my piece. This is what's happening. So, and it was funny because this is like, I think I started working on it like 2016 and then like 2017, like the market was blooming in 2017. I think at the time I was in Dubai, I was on some project there with their government. So I'm like writing this thing in my hotel room in Dubai because I'm like, I need to publish this thing because prices are going up like 25%. Awesome. You know, like I need to do my part to cool things down, right? And so I published it and, you know, and then, I mean, effectively what I kind of found was correct, you know, and then because the areas that ended up being the most vulnerable, and this wasn't even me, the Bank of Canada took my data a year later and they looked at every region in the GTA. They sort of compared sort of the percentages home bought by investors against their decline in home prices. Yeah. And it was like a plot, it was like a, you know, very highly correlated, plot, and you could see that had a significant impact. And that's kind of where I started looking at the effects that they were having on the market. You know, and sort of to the question, I mean, of course, I mean, and this really stems from, again, so a lot of the like the academic stuff that I'm reading, where like in most housing bubbles, it's really when investors step in, you know, and are buying strictly for capital gain, where you start to see this disconnect in house prices and in house values. So to me, like the role of investors is significant because it kind of is like a proxy for like the speculative mood of the market when people don't care anymore about rents, they don't care about whatever, they just assume prices going up, whatever. Yeah. And I kind of see that in the pre-construction because to me it just seems completely irrational.
Agreed. Yeah, for sure.
You know, and I think it has played a big role. Now to their question about I had at the time just studied low-rise homes because it was easier to analyze. Like over the past 6 to 9 months, I ran some data again for the Bank of Canada where we started looking at how dominant investors were in the condo market. And I believe, I mean, I didn't look at this data today, it's probably been a few months. The condo market was actually quite different because in the low-rise home segment, you know, resale segment, you know, investors were buying detached homes and just renting them, you know, as soon as they bought them resale. Whereas in the condo market is very different. A lot of the investors in the condo market were not buying resale condos to rent them. Like that was a small percentage. I can't remember what it was, like maybe 5 or 7%. The main percentage were either people who bought them pre-construction and just rented them, which is kind of obvious. And I think a big percentage is also people who bought them either pre-construction or resale, lived them for 5 or 7 years, and then moved, but kept it as an investment. Yeah. Right? So very different dynamic and behavior. But again, of course, that is, you know, that is another segment of investor. And you know, and to people's points, if people think it's terrible, I shouldn't be, you know, talking negative. I mean, I'm an investor. Like, I don't have anything against real estate investors. I'm a real estate investor. I think people misunderstand I think the point is more like you have to be in understand like how these things are all impacting the market and where there might be vulnerabilities in the markets tomorrow, both as like a consumer, as a citizen, as an investor, whatever, and how all of those things are going to play out. And I think those are the things that I kind of tend to look at for sure.
Yeah, and that's somebody that follows your career pretty closely, right? For him to remember that.
Yeah.
So let me just take a quick scroll because I'm very thankful and sensitive of the time here. I don't want to keep you here all day. Okay, I got to go with this one. It's another pricing question, but this is interesting. Do you foresee a scenario where GTA home prices adjusted for inflation never hit the highs again obtained by the pre-coronavirus? So it would take some interesting math on that. My opinion is no, but he's asking if you see a situation where that would happen.
I mean, no, I don't think so. And I think for the question, of course, for me is more about like when they will hit it, not, I mean, I think they'll hit it again. I think a lot has changed. Toronto is, it's obviously a superstar city. There's a lot of demand internationally. Mm-hmm. People will still want to move here even after this recession. So I don't think it's going to be a city that's not going to grow. Yeah. Right. And I think if you're going to subscribe to that view, you're basically subscribing to the view that people are not going to move here either because we're not letting them or they don't want to. And there's going to be no growth in the GTA because if there are people moving here and into a supply-constrained city, which is what the GTA is, you're going to see growth in house prices over time. I mean, it's just natural.
Yeah. Okay. So let me get to the last one here. Jimbo. Okay. So Jimbo, another regular blog reader, he says, with the government running a $250 billion deficit and total debt for the Canadian government, not including provinces, sitting at $700 billion, soon to be $1 trillion, what are the chances the government starts siphoning off real estate gains via tax? And then he's gone on here. I'll let the readers read this. But he's saying if they do create a tax, do you see them allowing us to write off real estate fees and land transfer tax? As someone that is incredibly cynical about government, I'm going to defer to you on that first.
That's a great question. I mean, I've seen people float that, mm-hmm. How are they going to start paying this back? I don't know if they're going to start taxing capital gains on houses anytime soon. I think the more likely scenario might be they might be able to sort of, at least in the short term, persuade people to do it on flipped properties, like short-term sales. Yeah. That might be a potential, but even that, I mean, again, I'm conflicted on all these policies. I don't like flippers. I don't like speculation, but the reality is, at least in the GTA, most of the speculation is not short-term flipping, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And if you start doing that, then you discourage people who are building homes, which mm-hmm. again are providing stimulus to the economy and are providing a service. I mean, the people who are tearing down the small bungalows, building a 4-bedroom home, which is probably closer to what people want today. I mean, a lot of East York are like 650 square foot bungalows that are $1 million. And there's more probably value in having a little bit more density and bigger homes. Well, if you're charging those people a fee now or higher taxes, it obviously discourages that. So I don't even know if they're going to do that, to be honest with you, unless they have carve-outs for builders, because that would be obviously terrible to kind of cut that out of our economy. So mm-hmm. I don't know if we're going to have a capital gains tax anytime soon, personally. But
see, my viewpoint's more cynical. I agree with everything you said. Like, just from a basic, grade 12 economic standpoint, make a list of all of the people that benefit from Builder John making this house. So you think about all of the tradespeople. You just think about the economic cycle. Every person that comes through that house is making money. The drywall guy, the heating, venting, air conditioning guy, they get that money. They go and buy goods and services. This isn't a bad thing. But I don't know that the federal government is going to look at it that way. I think that they're going to say, who can we tax? How can we get the money back? I think the government's going to raise taxes on the wealthiest, which is typically what they do. I think they're going to raise the corporate tax rate, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But honestly, the tax-free capital gain on a primary residence, that's the holy grail of Canadian taxation, is that we get that. I think they're going to come after that. And then, yeah, I do think that some sort of speculation tax is going to come into play because I don't know how in the world they're going to pay back $1 trillion, but maybe they don't pay it back.
I mean, yeah, I mean, maybe they don't pay it back. I mean, if they do a tax on capital gains, I think probably the more likely scenario, I mean, now that I think about it, is some tax over and above a certain amount.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you know, if you made whatever it is, like X hundred, you know, above some threshold, you know, so your first X 100,000 are tax free.
Yeah.
You know, if you make more than that, you pay whatever 10% on it or something like that.
Yeah.
May very well be possible. But again, I mean, who knows, man? We're in uncharted.
I know. Right, and then will they let us write off land transfer tax and real estate fees? I mean, in theory they should, if you're taxing it. Okay, so one last question, I promise, only because this is a good one. So this was asked last week. What pieces of data, or as a stats guy basically, what pieces of data or stats are your go-to? What pieces of data or stats are the most important or most accurate during a real estate, in our market? And then what pieces of stats are the most counterintuitive? What do you think of that? I guess as a stats guy, what are your, you know, like I always look at average home price, you know, I'm a sucker. I look at, you know, the basics of what Treb gives us because they're the most easy to kind of compute. And then I would also add that to that last point, the counterintuitive, I've always said that when you look at the increase in housing prices as a ratio to the increase of income, I've always said that that's the bears go-to. And I think with the redistribution of income from baby boomers basically giving their kids down payments, that doesn't matter. But what are your favorite stats, I guess, would be a better question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if we call it the velocity of the market, but it also kind of tells you how the market is accelerating or decelerating. Mm-hmm. So meaning, how is the inventory changing over time, right? And this kind of goes back to, like I said, in 2017, for example, when the market turned, it wasn't so much that inventory was low because we didn't really hit 6 months of inventory. We only hit like 3 or 3.5 months for the GTA. But it was a rapid decline. It's like all of a sudden we had like half a month of inventory in like February or March, and then supply really piled up. And it kind of told you the momentum of the market was one that was getting worse, not better for sellers, right? And that's kind of why I find that metric helpful. And of course, it's also highly correlated with house prices. I mean, it's just, you know, the higher the inventory, the higher the likelihood of the slow growth in prices, and the lower the inventory, the more likely we are to see prices rise. So it tells you so much about kind of where the market is today, where it might be going, and how it might impact home prices. So that's kind of the one metric I find is really helpful. To your point, the counterintuitive one, I think actually your examples are a really good one. I mean, debt to income is obviously a difficult one to just use. I mean, because I think there's two things that are very different from sort of past environments, which is, I mean, of course, number one is, I mean, interest rates are substantially lower. Yeah. I mean, so you can't just look at debt on its own because it's really the carrying costs of the debt that matter. So obviously when rates are, you know, 2.5%, you're able to take on a lot more debt than if they were 10% 20 years ago. So the one thing, of course, is it doesn't capture the effect of interest rates if you just look at debt to income. And then the other is that it doesn't really capture the fact that, you know, cities like Toronto and Vancouver have had a ton of foreign capital moving in here, right? And there are relationships between, if you have a lot of foreign money, that is just going to stimulate the demand, stimulate prices above where they probably would have been if they were just driven by local incomes alone, right? And, you know, especially, I mean, the other factor is a lot of these markets, and Josh Gordon actually just published a paper recently. He's like a prof out of Simon Fraser, where he looked at sort of the relationships of foreign buyers and incomes and all of these in sort of Vancouver and Toronto. And one of the challenges is with sort of debt to income is in some of these markets, so you have a lot of satellite families. So these are like families who, like the main, like the kids, the mother will be here, but maybe the spouse, the husband lives, you know, works overseas. They declare their income over there, but they're financing the home here. So technically on paper, those households don't make a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
So you have some of these markets like Markham and Richmond Hill, where there probably may be a lot, disproportionate number of satellite families, have a really, really high price to income ratio, but it's tough to sort of disentangle how much of an effect the satellite families are having an impact on this, because they're not reporting their income here, right? So I agree with you. There's challenges just by looking at these metrics on their own. The GTA, the City of Toronto is actually another good example, because the City of Toronto has a disproportionate number of renters. So our price to income in Toronto is actually also very high.
Yeah.
But it ignores the fact that I think it's something like 45% or something like that of households are renters, versus in the 905 it's something like only like 15 or 20% are renters, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there are challenges by looking at just some of these and just assuming they tell us everything about the market.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You tired yet?
That was good. Holy, we've been on for what, a good hour and a half.
I'm so thankful, and I'm also so sorry. I should have given you some sort of idea how long it would take. I honestly, I thought it would be like a half an hour, but and there's probably more questions, and some of the readers are going to kill me, but I'm sensitive of the time. So thanks so much for doing this, man. You're brilliant, and you know what? The readers know it, and that's why they wanted to see you. And that's why you get so many media quotes. I always get the quotes like when they want like the test from the Toronto Star. Like if you want some crazy quote about dumping gasoline on a fire, she comes to me. When they want an intelligent, thoughtful quote based on research and stats, they go to you. So.
I think they come to you for the intelligent ones too.
They like my sound bites.
Listen, they come to you too, because I think in some ways we're very similar. Like you kind of tell it like it is. There aren't a lot of people who will kind of talk about, the irrationality and pre-construct, to just be frank about certain segments that just don't make sense. So, and I think that's why they come to you, and I think why your readers find your style refreshing too. So.
I hope so.
I
hope so. Well, thanks, man. I owe you a ton for this. So I'll put this up on, and we'll be in touch. Be safe out there.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, John. Take care. Bye. Wow. Was that something? Holy moly. Thank you so much to John Pasalis. My goodness, on a Sunday afternoon, getting like 2 hours of John's time. Hope you guys enjoyed Monday blog, Friday blog, and here's a little something. My hard drive actually ran out of space while we were filming this. Seriously, this thing's like 25 gigabytes right now. That's how you know that your interview was long, running out of hard drive space. So I hopefully will be able to edit that last question because we lost a little bit of it. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. This was a lot of fun. As I said, I don't know that this is going to be the new theme here on Toronto Realty blog. But for the time being, hey, until the market picks back up again, I would rather have high-level conversations with people, brilliant people like John Pasalis and like Ben Rabideau last week. And who knows what we'll do next week. So let's end it there. Hopefully by Friday, we'll be able to look at some TREP stats. Thank you again so much for watching, guys. Have a fantastic day. Bye for now.